I heard Steve once yesterday, and I understand he spoke twice. So I'm and I know the response he had. So I'll kind of introduce him by saying the legendary Steve Brusatte, who has this wonderful title of Professor of Paleontology and Evolution at the University of Edinburgh. And of course, he's well known, a specialist in the area of Jurassic and dinosaurs. Has written that classic book on the dinosaur, the rise and fall of the dinosaurs, and the rise and reign of the mammals, and so on. So, without further ado, this is Ireland's past. This is the serious past. So, Steve, over to you.
Great. There we go. All right. Thank you, Becky. All right. Well, thank you again for letting me speak. I know some of you, would have seen my talk last night, and I'll just tell you right away, it's the exact same slides, but I'll do it a little bit differently. I'm going to do it a little bit shorter, a little bit sweeter, and I just want to give you an overview of the island's prehistoric past. So it's been very enjoyable for me to hear the speakers today talking about the last few hundred years here in the islands. Very interesting. I'm going to go back 170 million years to tell you about the dinosaurs and the other animals that used to live here back in the Jurassic period. Although there's already been a dinosaur talk because the bird talk. So you will get a little snippet, just a little bit, of how we actually have fossils here on Skye of the ancestors of birds, which were dinosaurs. Okay, so we're here on Skye. I come from a long way away. I grew up in the middle part of America, and about a decade ago, I was hired at the University of Edinburgh. And over the last decade, I've really enjoyed tremendously living in Scotland. I've felt very welcome in the community here. I've become a dual citizen. I have a young son now who is very much a Scottish boy. So I just, once again, just to, as kind of trite as it sounds, a big thank you to the people here across Scotland, including here on the Isle of Skye, who welcomed me, because over the past decade, I have led a lot of different fieldwork trips up here to look for fossils and to dig up dinosaurs, because the Isle of Skye really is a sweet spot for paleontologists, because there are rocks here from the Jurassic age. That's a time that dinosaurs lived. And these were rocks that were formed in rivers and beaches and ponds and lagoons, the kind of places where dinosaurs lived, so we can find their fossils there. And really, the Isle of Skye, it's pretty much the only place in Scotland where you can find dinosaurs. We have started to find some dinosaur fossils on Eigg and on Muck and a few other places, but really, Skye is Scotland's dinosaur island. And it's because, again, a lot of the rocks on Skye, especially along the east coast in Trotternish, north of Portree, a lot of those rocks that are sculpted into that beautiful landscape around Staffin, Valtos, around Kilt Rocks. Some of those rocks are volcanic, but a lot of them are rocks made of sand and mud from the Jurassic period, and you can find fossils there. And these are important fossils. They're important, of course, for us in Scotland because they're Scottish dinosaurs. I mean, that's really neat to have fossils of the things that lived here 170 million years ago. But these fossils are also very important globally. Paleontologists around the world know about the Isle of Skye because the dinosaurs here are unique, and they're particularly important because what we know about dinosaur evolution, we know the first dinosaurs lived in what's called the Triassic period of Earth history. This began about 250 million years ago. This was the time of the supercontinent Pangaea, when all the land was gathered together into this one giant landmass that stretched from the North Pole to the South Pole. And it was on that landmass that the first mammals evolved, so our ancestors, and alongside them the very first dinosaurs. And these first dinosaurs were not T-Rexes and Brontosauruses and the types of dinosaurs that we're most familiar with. These first dinosaurs were mostly small, they were pretty humble, they were not particularly important animals in their ecosystems, they were not at the top of the food chain, they were not the biggest meat eaters, they didn't shake the earth as they walked, nothing like that. But they were mostly the size of dogs, up to the size of humans, the size of horses. The biggest ones were maybe about the size of a giraffe. So, that was the humble start of dinosaurs. Then, of course, we know that dinosaurs changed. And later on, in the late part of the next period of time, called the Jurassic Period, and then into the Cretaceous Period, this is when a lot of the famous dinosaurs lived. In the late Jurassic, you have the really big ones with the long necks, Brontosaurus, Diplodocus, Stegosaurus with the plates on its backs. In the Cretaceous, that was the time of T-Rex and Triceratops. And so throughout dinosaur history, there was a change, really, from these first small dinosaurs to the giant ones. And that change happened in the middle part of the Jurassic period. A million year interval, about 175 to about 165 million years ago. And it just so happens that there's very few fossils of that age from anywhere around the world. It's just the bad luck of geology, of what kind of rocks are available, what kind of rocks were formed during that time that might have fossils in them. There's very few anywhere in the world, but it just so happens that these rocks here on Skye come from that black hole in our understanding of dinosaur evolution. So that's why paleontologists around the world are very interested in them. Strangely enough, though, it was only in the 1980s that the first dinosaur fossil was found here and recovered and studied and identified correctly as being a dinosaur. And that was a single footprint that was in a block of rock that fell off of one of the cliffs at Brothers Point, north of Portree. So it was just around the time I was born that the very first dinosaur was found here. But since then, people have been finding a lot more, and over the last decade, I've been very privileged to be able to work here on Skye and get to know Skye very well, and to bring my students here and find a lot of cool new fossils. Now, I'll give away a little bit of the answer here. These are the types of dinosaurs that we know lived on Skye back in the Jurassic. And there's more as well, and there's things that, of course, it wasn't just dinosaurs. There were mammals that lived here, and salamanders, and lizards, and crocodiles, and there were different reptiles living in the ocean and flying around the sky. And I'm gonna paint a picture in this talk of what the world here was like back in the Jurassic, when all of these different animals were living here. And I'll give you a few snippets of some of the fossils that we've found over the last decade that help tell the story. And in order to envision this, I'm going to have to ask you to suspend what you know about the reality of Scotland today. You know, put your senses aside and go back 170 million years ago when Scotland was part of an island, but a very different island, a much smaller island, actually. It was in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, but the Atlantic Ocean was very narrow back then. The supercontinent had just started to break apart, and it split across what's now the Atlantic Ocean. That's why, you know, South America and Africa look like puzzle pieces. They were once joined, they split apart. The Atlantic came in. So the Atlantic was just forming in the middle part of the Jurassic, and so this Scottish island was in the Atlantic, but the Atlantic was this narrow little sliver. That island was a little bit farther south than it is today, a bit closer to the equator, but the temperature around the world, on the whole, was much higher than today. There were no ice caps, there were no big glaciers. The global temperature was higher. So this Scottish island that these dinosaurs frolicked on was a subtropical island. So it was something like the Canary Islands or parts of California today, if you can imagine that. And I know that's just unfathomable when you look at what it is here today. So, this is Skye today. Of course, a beautiful place, and a lot of fossils lurking in these hills and in these cliffs that tell that story of when this land was the subtropical island 170 million years ago. And how do we know it? We know it from real fossils. We know it from real fossils. And I know we've heard a lot of talks about history today, and we've seen talks, about the archives, talks about maps, talks about books, about all of the records that historians have to tell the human history of these islands. Well, our records are fossils. Those are the clues that tell us about what this land was like millions and millions of years ago. And we have to go out and look for these fossils. And pretty much every year, I bring teams up to Skye, including many students at the University of Edinburgh, and we look for these fossils. And it's a whole lot of fun, a little bit challenging, of course, given the weather. We're always battling the rain and the wind, and most of the fossils are found along the coast, so we always have to pay attention to the tides, but it's well worth it because we find some pretty neat things. None of this is possible without a dear friend of mine, and really a hero of mine, and a friend of many of yours too. Doogie's name has come up so much in conversation this weekend, including today. This is Doogie Ross here, who many of you know. He runs the Staffen Museum north of Portree. He built that museum himself, literally. He built it from the ruins of a 19th century schoolhouse. And in that museum are a lot of the fossils and also a lot of the archaeological and human artifacts that Doogie has collected over the last few decades. He started collecting when he was a teenager, and he's built up this amazing collection, but also he's somebody who really is the eyes and ears on the island. And he's a great liaison between scientists like me and locals and tourists, people that find fossils, hikers that find fossils. He's really the nexus of all of this. And without Doogie, we wouldn't really know any of what I'm going to tell you today. And Doogie grew up here on Skye, grew up in a Gaelic-speaking household. He's become an internationally recognized expert on dinosaurs, which I think is just thrilling. And the only person I know who's built his own museum, which is incredible when you think about it. Okay, I'm gonna give you a few snippets, just a few of our discoveries that will show you what kind of fossils we have that tell us what this world used to be like. One of them is this discovery we made up at Duntollum, not too far from the ruins of Duntollum Castle. Now, when the tide is high, the waves, lap up against the beach. When the tide goes down, that coast turns into this rock platform that juts out about 100 meters into the water. We went out there once because a geologist friend of ours found a little jawbone that got us very excited, and we were hoping, maybe we'll find the rest of the skeleton. Maybe it'll be a new dinosaur species. And we looked all day. We didn't find any bones. It was a really quite disappointing day. But what we did start to look at, just almost randomly as we were walking back to our cars late that afternoon, early evening, were these tide pools. And there were a lot of tide pools. There were over 100 of these circular depressions in the rock, full of algae and seaweed and barnacles and all the normal things. And at first we just started looking at them, just looking at what was inside. And the more we looked, the more this kind of seemed strange to us. So there were so many tide pools. They were all about the same size and shape. And we could start to make out what we thought were some patterns. They weren't just randomly aligned, but there was a bit of like a zigzagging left-right linear sequence of some of these things. So that was odd. And we could see that some of them were filled in with a harder rock that actually brought out some shape to them. They weren't just holes, but they had, bits sticking out at the end. So, 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's interesting. That's weird. And some of them were paired together. We could really see that there was a consistency of these things. There was a bigger horseshoe-shaped one, a smaller crescent-shaped one in front. And after a few moments, it dawned on us that what we were looking at here were actually fossils. Dinosaur fossils, but not bones or teeth or skeletons, but the fossilized marks that they left behind, their handprints and their footprints. And this was such a fun revelation. It was myself and Tom Challenge, my friend who's a fellow paleontologist in Edinburgh, when we just realized that we were looking at these 170 million year old footprints and handprints of dinosaurs, records of these animals going about their everyday lives. And it's these kind of dinosaurs that made the tracks. The long-necked dinosaurs, the ones with the tiny heads and the big bellies and the arms and legs that look like Greek columns, what we call the sauropod dinosaurs. They were the size of about 3 elephants put together. And they were actually fairly small. Later sauropods, later on in the Cretaceous period, would become like heavier than a jet airplane, like an EasyJet plane or a Ryanair plane, which is stunning. These were merely the size of 3 elephants, but they were some of the first dinosaurs in Earth history that got to be really big. When these things were just stomping around ancient Scotland, they were the biggest things, or among the very biggest things that had ever lived in the history of the Earth. And we keep finding new track sites. We keep going out, we keep looking. I have great students, one of whom is Paige here, who came from the US to study with us, and Paige has led a lot of work in describing these track sites, and in particular using drones to fly over these track sites to make really high quality maps. And those maps help us understand, how many footprints and handprints we have, how big they are, how many different dinosaurs made them. They help us identify the makers of those footprints, having really good models. We can basically do the Cinderella thing and fit dinosaur feet to those footprints and see which ones match. And that's what helps tell us, it was a big long-necked dinosaur that made those tracks, for instance. And those dinosaurs here in this artwork by John Hode from Perth, a great paleo artist, this is what he imagines one of those dinosaurs would have looked like. So just imagine something of that stature. This was an animal that would have struggled to really fit inside of this room. I mean, it could because the ceiling here is quite high, but you probably couldn't get 2 of them in here very easily. And again, when they were living, they were some of the first true giants in Earth history. But it wasn't only these long-necked dinosaurs. There were other dinosaurs that left their footprints and handprints in the Jurassic on Skye. And some of them were meat-eating dinosaurs, like this one here in the foreground. This was only about the size of a human, but it had sharp teeth and claws. It's what we call a theropod dinosaur. These things were the ancestors, basically, of T-Rex and of birds. Both of those groups would come from the theropod dinosaurs later on. This site at Duntollum, we had a lot of fun communicating it to the press, and it was really fun to see some of the newspapers and tabloids pick it up, and we gave it this nickname of the dinosaur disco, just having a little bit of fun, but trying to convey that message that here we have about 150 footprints at Duntollum and handprints of these dinosaurs just doing their thing back in the Jurassic. And I think that's really neat. That is a record of dinosaurs living their lives. And you can go see it. Because when we find footprints like that, we don't dig them out of the ground. We destroy the landscape. And where would we put them? So they're there. They're in situ. And you can go to Duntollum. You can park just alongside the road. Make sure it's low-ish tide. And you can go walk with those dinosaurs. And we're starting to find even more track sites now at Brothers Point, which is also along that Trotternish coastline, and we're seeing even more types of dinosaurs that left their footprints. And these are beautiful sites to work at. We fly the drones over these sites. Some of these footprints match the feet of stegosaurs, those dinosaurs with the plates on their backs. Other ones match the feet of even bigger long-necked dinosaurs with really clear toe impressions that really help us do the Cinderella thing and fit the feet of dinosaur skeletons. And then others are these big tracks with only 3 toes. No handprints, so an animal that walked only on his hind legs, and these seem to match the feet of what we call duck-billed dinosaurs, and these were plant-eating dinosaurs that had big beaks, kind of like a duck. So we really have an entire ecosystem that's emerging from these footprints. Giant long-necked dinosaurs, which were plant-eaters. Stegosaurs with the plates on their backs, also plant-eaters. Duck-billed dinosaurs, also plant-eaters, but probably they all specialized on different plants. Those long-necked dinosaurs seem to have made their footprints in the lagoons. We find a lot of their tracks in rocks that were actually formed in shallow water, so it seems like they actually lived a little bit in the water, or at least would go out in the water. The stegosaurs and duckbills probably kept more to the land, and then you had those meat-eating theropod dinosaurs too. So you're seeing here on this subtropical Scottish island 170 million years ago in the middle of that narrow but ever-widening Atlantic Ocean, basically a whole food chain of dinosaurs. And we can tell that from the footprints, but we do also have fossil bones. We do. We just don't have as many bones as footprints, and the bones don't look so good, so I don't have as many photos. But you'll see some good bones in a minute. So that's what's happening on the land. But you might also be wondering, what was the Jurassic world like here in the water and in the air? And you had other animals living offshore and other animals flapping about that were not dinosaurs. And we have fossils of some of those animals. We have fossils that come from Berwick Bay, right near the power station. And some of these fossils were discovered in the 1950s by this man, Brian Shawcross, when he was quite young. And he showed them to us, and we recognized that they belonged to a type of reptile, not a dinosaur, a cousin of the dinosaurs, a type of reptile called an Ichthyosaur. And these were the things that ruled the waves when dinosaurs dominated the land. And they were reptiles that looked like fish or like dolphins. And that's because they lived a similar lifestyle. They were really fast swimmers. They swam with those flippers. They had a long snout with lots of teeth that they used to catch fish and catch squid. And so we determined not only that we had an ichthyosaur based on those bones that Brian found, but it was a new type of ichthyosaur never seen anywhere else in the world, a uniquely Scottish ichthyosaur. So Doogie Ross actually came down here to the Gaelic College and talked to some of the lecturers and came up with the name, a Gaelic name, one of the only times this has been done for a species, and we named this Yarkavara, which means something like marine reptile or marine lizard. And the press caught wind, and of course, they played up the Loch Ness Monster angle, as they always do, which, you know, is maybe a little bit silly. But we took the opportunity to try to connect with people and say, hey, whatever may or may not be lurking in Loch Ness right now, what we do know for sure is that in the Jurassic period, there were real sea monsters that lived in Scotland. And when we announced the discovery of Brian's fossil, some other fossils came out of the woodwork. And here was a letter that a copy was sent to me. It was a letter that was sent to what was then the Royal Museum in the 1960s, now the National Museum of Scotland. And a guy named Norrie Gillis, who ran the power station back in the 60s, he actually had found an ichthyosaur, a bunch of backbones sticking out of the rock in this old photo which was sent to me by his son. And the National Museum collected it, and it was in the collections, and we didn't know about it, but we tracked it down and we cleaned it up, and a few years ago we unveiled it. And this is probably another species. We haven't given it a name yet. We're still studying it, but this thing was about the size of a speedboat. So these were big, ferocious animals that lived offshore while the dinosaurs were on the land. Now, living slightly more near shore in the lagoons and in the shallow water were some other animals, and we found some fossils of them at Valtos, as you can see pretty close to Killed Rock. There's the waterfall down there. So a lot of this stretch here is formed of these blocks of sandstone that have fallen off these cliffs. And those blocks of rock can have bones in them. And here's one tiny bone that Tom Challens, who I mentioned, who found the footprints with me, that Tom saw this bone. Somehow it's this tiny little thing, just an inch or so long. And it turns out to be the jawbone of a crocodile, a tiny little crocodile just the size of a lapdog. And it was these little crocs that would have swam in the shallow water of the lagoons. It probably would have been snapping at the legs of those giant dinosaurs as they waded through the water. But what about the sky? What was in the sky on the Isle of Skye back then? Well, we didn't know anything really until very recently. There were no birds back then, we don't think. Birds evolved from dinosaurs a little bit later in the Jurassic, we think. Although who knows, maybe we will find the world's oldest fossil bird sometime here on the Isle of Skye. But what was flying around back then? There were things that were flapping over the heads of dinosaurs. And one of our students, Amelia Penny, made this incredible discovery out on one of our trips in 2017. And Amelia saw this thing in the rocks at Brothers Point. That's what she's scrutinizing there. And it was something that was a bit darker in color. It seemed to have a shape to it. It seemed to have a different texture to it. This is what it looked like up close. And as you can see from the title of that slide, it's the skull of a pterodactyl, a flying reptile, what we technically call a pterosaur. And these things are sometimes mistaken as dinosaurs. You see them in the dinosaur toy sets and on the dinosaur posters, but they're actually close cousins of dinosaurs. They were the first animals with bones to ever evolve flight in the history of the Earth. And this fossil turns out to be one of the very best pterosaurs that's ever been found in Britain, and by far the very best one that's known from the middle part of the Jurassic anywhere in the world. And what was amazing about it is that when Amelia found that skull, we thought, wow, we have the head of a pterodactyl. This is amazing. Let's get this out of the rock. So Doogie came down with his saws. We started to remove the rock. And as the rock split, we saw there were other bones there. And that head led to a neck, and that neck led to a body, and that body had wings sticking out and a tail sticking out. And we basically had the skeleton of this pterodactyl. And Doogie worked hard with his saw to cut it out. We were battling the tides. The tides actually came up and encroached on the fossil. I told the full story last night. I won't go through it again, but we really feared we were going to lose this fossil to the waves. And as the water was coming up, we really only needed about 10 or 15 minutes to get it out. We couldn't quite do it, so we dumped all the glue we had on the bones. And then we had to wait for the next low tide. We came back almost at midnight that day, just hoping that the fossil would still be there. And as the waters receded, we could see that it was, that the glue held, and we really only did need about another 10 or 15 minutes to get it out. We hoisted it up onto the beach the next morning. This thing is very heavy, this slab. And about 400 pounds or so it probably weighs. We got it up to the beach. We put it on this motorized wheelbarrow for that long, slow journey up. If those of you that have been to Brothers Point know, you're down by the water. You have to get up basically to the level of the cliffs in order to get to the road. And so we put it on this wheelbarrow. We got it up. We brought it back to Edinburgh. We cleaned up the fossil. We conserved it. And we saw that, yes, indeed, we have this beautiful skeleton. And this is much of the skeleton. Some of the other bones are on that other part that split off. So you're not seeing everything, and you're not seeing the whole wings here. But there's the head that Amelia first found, and there's the neck. There's the body. Here's this beautiful little hand with claws. And what's sticking out there is the ring finger, and it's the ring finger that was super long, kind of like a E.T. finger that stuck out and supported the wings of these pterosaurs. Their wings were made of skin, not of feathers like birds, but they're giant sails of skin. And then the body, and there's a little foot, and there's the tail. So another PhD student of mine, we actually developed a PhD project, and Natalia Jagielska came to do this project with us. She moved to Britain when she was about 9 or 10. She grew up in Poland. She's an excellent scientist. She's also a great artist, and this is how she envisions this pterodactyl. And about a year ago, we unveiled it at the National Museum, and we published a scientific paper on it where we established it as a new species. A uniquely Scottish species, and of course, as a uniquely Scottish species, it needs a uniquely Scottish name, which of course means a Gaelic name. So Doogie once again came here to the Gaelic College, talked to some of the lecturers, and they came up with this name, Dearc, which means basically, and again, forgive my pronunciation in Gaelic, but basically a winged reptile from Skye. And it plays off the Gaelic name of Skye as the winged isle, which I think is really cool. And it is the wings of this animal that are truly important. This animal has a wingspan of over 8 feet wide. So that's wider than a king-size bed. And up until Amelia found this fossil, nobody thought that these pterodactyls ever had a wingspan of more than about 5 feet for the entire Jurassic period. So this is a record breaker. And this animal, when it was flying over the heads of the dinosaurs 170 million years ago, it was the biggest thing that had ever flown in the history of the Earth that we know of. So again, we unveiled it last year at the National Museum, which was a whole lot of fun. And there's Amelia next to me. There's Nick Fraser, who some of you know, who's a fellow of the Royal Society of Edinburgh, eminent paleontologist. There's Natalia in the background doing an interview for television, which is really fun. It hit the news. It was a global story. And as I was saying last night, that day my parents called me up in Illinois back home and said, your student's in the newspaper. We saw a picture of your student in the newspaper. It was just incredible to see it have that kind of global reach. And it is a very important fossil. Now, we keep finding more fossils. And I keep coming back as a scientist, but also with my family. So there's my little boy. This is in 2020, the summer of 2020, right when the first lockdowns ended. As soon as we could, we got out here to Skye. We needed to get out of Edinburgh. And Anthony was just about 9-10 months old at that point. And there he is, crawling in one of the dinosaur footprints. Last summer, we came back with Anthony and with my parents, actually, to show them some of the footprints, which was just really a very touching thing. And Anthony's, much bigger now, and there he is standing on one of those sauropod dinosaur tracks. That gives you a sense of the scale of those animals. And bringing Anthony to see these tracks, that's really inspired our whole family. There's my wife, Anne, who some of you would have met yesterday. We did a schools event here in the morning, and these track sites inspired Anne to write this children's book, Doogie the Dinosaur, the first and only, and therefore the best, children's book on Scottish dinosaurs, which is a storybook about these dinosaurs and pterosaurs and crocodiles and ichthyosaurs living in Jurassic Scotland. A fun story, but one I can assure you is factually correct, is based on all the fossils that we have. So we keep looking for more, we keep finding more. This is giving us the story of what Scotland was really like 170 million years ago, the island's prehistoric past. And I just want to say, when I write about fossils, and I've written these books for adults as well on dinosaurs and mammals, Skye is integral to these books. I tell stories in these books about working here on Skye. Doogie Ross is a big character in the dinosaur book, for instance. So it's become such a special place for me. And I just hope, may it long continue. And the last thing I will say is there's a whole lot more to be found out there. There's a lot more to be found. We are really just scratching the surface. It's been great seeing a lot of younger people here, especially yesterday with the school group, and then some younger fossil enthusiasts, kids who collect fossils, who brought their fossils to show me, that live on the island. It's great. And those kids and everybody should know there is a lot more to be found. Most fossils are not found by the paleontology professors and PhDs. They're found by hikers, they're found by farmers, construction workers. Even kids can find amazing fossils sometimes that turn out to be new species of dinosaurs. So keep your eyes open. Thank you very much.